I'm excited to dive into a topic that I know is crucial for many of you watching. As we speak to CIOs across various industries in both Latin America and the US, one thing becomes abundantly clear. The journey of building new products is riddled with challenges and misconceptions. As CIOs, you are at the front row of innovation, tasked with not only leading your organization technology vision, but also ensuring that every new product aligns with strategic goals and delivers real value. And this is no small feat, especially in an environment when rapid change and high expectations are the norms. Today, we're going to tackle three of the most frequent misconceptions that we see time and time again when it comes to building new products. We understand the pressure you face, the need for quick wins, the importance of demonstrating tangible progress to your teams and stakeholders. So let's dig into it. Let's talk about what happens when you have a new product idea. How do you turn that into a real product?
Well, yeah, like the conventional idea is that you would like very fast turn into like designing and building and trying to bring your MVP, as people call it, to market, right? Immediately, that's like the typical thing you would do. It's like, okay, we got an idea. Let's like bring this down to earth by creating a product. It's basically by investing in creating a product, which is most likely the most expensive exercise that you can do when you're in an early stage of developing a business, right? The way we tackled it is in a completely different way, right? And it's like, wait, let's turn this idea not into a product first, but into a business first. And that's the idea of traction first. And the way we do that is by creating a waiting list of customers, right? And say, okay, you've got an idea. That sounds great. Let's see if this idea is really desirable. This product idea, this concept, this service idea is desirable to the target audience. Why? Because lack of market need is the biggest killer when it comes to new ventures and new products and general innovation. So why not tackle that first risk of people not getting your value proposition or not really needing your value proposition at the very first stage. But the important thing is creating a waiting list of customers is not a mechanical effort of, okay, we'll create a landing page, we'll get some really good copy from our copywriters, we'll put some stock photography in there, and we'll let people land into that landing page and we'll capture their emails and put them into a waiting list. It's not. The key of building a waiting list is creating a value proposition, bringing it to market, and listening what those customers are saying and how they're reacting to each of the things that you are presenting so that you can modify that and create something that is incredibly desirable. So it's about finding desirability by changing, by creating a pivot. It's the first opportunity to pivot a business, right? You think you're going to build this, but as soon as you start talking to customers, you realize that you don't need to build this. You need to build this thing that is a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left, or it's a different flavor here or a flavor there. So the business of creating a waiting list is a transformational exercise. If you think that you're just going to grab your value proposition, you're going to stick it into a landing page and you're going to get it, then don't do it, because there is no value in it. The value is in being able to listen and to change when you don't even have a prototype, when you just have an idea. Because to change the idea, the cost of changing the idea is zero. The minute you have to lay code and you want to do a little change, you start piling up money. So turning the product idea into a business first by creating a waiting list of customers that are eager to hear that to get your product and to start paying for it.
Yeah, I think that's totally right, because as you say, a lot of people have this build first approach, right? And that's what's commonly talked about and done widely in the startup area and space. And what we're saying here is that's actually quite an expensive way to find out what your audience really wants, because even if you do understand the problem, you still have to go through this exercise of designing that value proposition and iterating it over time. And basically what we're saying is that change that's going to happen, that's inevitable. and therefore what you want to do, you want to try and reduce the cost of that, right? You know it's going to come. Let's try to do it in the most cost-effective way possible and the fastest way, because obviously even with low code or no code, it still takes time to implement changes in a real product. And then there's some cycle time to get feedback from people actually using it and stuff. What we're saying is, let's pitch the value proposition in the context of a landing page and traffic that we're sending there, not because it's the landing page and the traffic that matters, but because of the feedback that we're getting around the value proposition, which we can virtually immediately integrate into it in order to continue to improve the appeal that it has for that target audience. So this is a much more evidence-based way, not just of, in comparison, and actually a much more efficient way than doing it in comparison to going build first, but it's also a much more evidence-based way than the market research reports or the user personas or the user testing, in the sort of made up environment, which takes a long time, and you got to build the prototypes and everything like that. And the other thing to point out there is that people usually, when they go into user testing, it's actually very confusing what they are testing at that point, especially for the person that is the subject of the testing, right? It's like you show them a prototype and whatnot, and I guarantee you, they're going to give you feedback on the colors. They're going to give you feedback on the buttons. They're going to give you feedback on, I don't quite like that screen. And that's not at all what you need to validate in the beginning. I think we'll come back to that, but it's really important.
You create these scenarios. You create the scenarios that you present to people. And as soon as you present a scenario to someone, it's like, this is not about me, right? This is a make-believe story. And I can say whatever you completely take people somewhere else.
They dissociate from
tests. It. Completely. It's very difficult to get real good insight from that kind of testing.
Yeah. So that's why we focus just on the value prop level. You want to test your value prop? Test the value prop. Don't muddle the picture by getting, prototypes and all that involved in it. So, okay. So then let's assume that we've done that, and the overriding sort of guideline is we want to spend as little time, effort, and money as possible to reduce this risk that JP talked about, which was the fact that there's no market need, right? So why would you build anything before you had managed to mitigate that risk sufficiently by being able to validate the value proposition in the way that we're talking about? We're building a waiting list, right? You wouldn't do it. It doesn't make sense. And so that's why when we're working with people, we encourage them to take this traction first or waiting list first type of approach. So the way that it starts, obviously, is that you're doing what's called the jobs to be done market research, right? You're identifying a problem in the market that's worth solving. And that's what your jobs to be done exercise helps to uncover, right? In a very quantified and very comprehensive and robust way. It's on the back of that you design a value proposition, right? You're starting with the problem, you're benchmarking the other solutions that exist in the market today, right? And you're designing a value proposition, always trying to get that outcome done better. Let's put it that way, which means doing it faster or doing it in what we call more accurately, getting a more reliable outcome. And we can do all of that by this waiting list approach that JP's been talking about, because that helps us to continue that design process that we have started kind of on paper with real people, but without having to invest in actually building an MVP of any kind. And the outcome for us, what we've found is that the velocity at which you can work in your startup, iterating that idea and getting it closer to the point where you have something that looks like product market fit is much, much faster.
Yeah, totally. But not only that, think about what is true about this idea that's now turned into a business, right? Especially when you're looking for backing, you're looking for a corporate sponsor, and you go into a room and say, oh, I've got this idea. I'm going to need $500,000 to develop it, right? Against, look, I've got 1,000 customers that they all want this product to be built. And I want to unlock that 1,000 customers of business by investing in a product. It's a very, very different conversation. You're talking about something that they're very aware of and they're very used to buying, which is basically you're talking about okay, it's like marketing. It's like buying clients. I have 1,000 customers that want to do business with us, but to be able to enable them to do business, we need to develop this piece of technology, right? It's a completely different conversation and one that a business
different
sponsor,
conversation. Exactly.
It's they're used to it. They can have that
Yeah.
conversation. You walking into a room and saying, we're gonna do innovation. I got this great idea. I need $500,000 from you. They will look at you and say, I'm sorry, but this is not going to hit the bottom line. I don't see this hitting the bottom line,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I am not convinced.
Yeah.
Now, if you start with the
Totally.
bottom line and say, I already have 1,000 customers, the burden is on him to invest because you already have the proof.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to make it so it almost feels like crazy not to invest, rather than
Exactly.
giving them a proposition that's based on an idea, not even data really, which, you know, they're having to weigh up the risk of investing. We want to take that risk off the table as much as possible. And that's why this approach is more effective.
Yeah. And with a handful of head of innovations that we've worked with in the last year, they've said that this is the most refreshing thing that we bring to the table, is the fact that somehow the commercial team is all behind us, the business team is all behind us. Like, I don't know how you got them in. It's like, we did not pitch any ideas. We did not. We just showed them customers. Right. And everybody gets excited about customers because it means business.
It's crazy, guys, because the way you are explaining this, you know, makes so much sense that it's hard to think about doing it a different way, right? Although I'm sure that a lot of people watching this, you know, are going through a transition, a mindset transition right now, and they're like, of course, you know, it's obvious, but why haven't we done this, right? So it's as obvious as mind blowing at the same time. But I want to push it and take it a step farther, right? Because I love this idea of making sure that we're spending time, money, and effort on the right, you know, idea, on the right project, on the right initiative. But let's take it a step farther, and let's assume that we already built our waiting list, we're already validated that it's worth it to spend time and effort on this initiative, and so now we're confident that we can invest in building our MVP. Once we're live with our MVP, how can we iterate our product to achieve strong user adoption?
Yeah. So on this one, you know, again, there is a conventional like thought and idea that typically if you don't have good adoption, it's because your UX or your UI is just flawed. And there's too much, I think they call it friction in the system, you know? And you know, I feel diametrically opposed to that thought. Like, UX and UI is a problem that you acquire when you have hundreds of thousands of customers in your product, you know? The people that really have the problem and that they get engaged with a solution that is, you know, differentiated and there's something that they can't do somewhere else, they would consume the products with the most horrible UX and UI in the world. So if you're in early stage, you've just released your MVP and you struggle to get true adoption, and we'll talk a little bit about what true adoption is in a second, but if you struggle to get true adoption, then I wouldn't point to UX and UI. I would strongly recommend you to look at what is it that you are offering, what's your value proposition, and how that value proposition breaks down into the different features that you're bringing to market. Okay? And bring back yourself to that concept of what is the offering. Yeah?
Totally agree.
To do that, the easiest way that we found is by running a pilot, right? And it's working very closely with those users to ensure that they are getting the job done in kind of a jobs to be done approach, and being able to measure exactly what value is being extracted from the value proposition, what's working and what's not, but even getting a good idea of the heartbeat of the product, being able to measure a product market fit scoring, and being able to get good insight on your like different releases that you're doing. Those are the kind of things that can help you really work on the level of adoption. And when I mean adoption, I mean someone communicating that your product is the way they get the job done, right? Before you came into a system, maybe they were using Excel. Maybe they were, you know, sending emails and talking to people and picking up the phone and doing a lot of things manually. That's their system, right? When you come in, you present a different proposition, and now they start using you, which is hopefully a lot simpler. That's when somebody adopted. But there's always a competition, and the competition is always what they were doing before. So if you say, oh, this product is unique, it never existed before in the market, it's like, no. People are using some kind of system and method to get the job done today, and that's your competition. So looking at how people are communicating that your product is the way they get the job done and not the way they did before, that's the key of adoption. And being able to measure that without having to use analytics is vital to be able to make sure that you push adoption. Because using analytics, it'll take you 6 months to figure out whether if a user has adopted your product or not. So you need to move away from analytics to get a feedback loop that is a lot smaller for you to be able to feed that information into your design process.
Yeah, I think one point to add there is that, consider that you're running a pilot for like 12 weeks or something. If you're just relying on analytics and you're just looking at retention and things like that in your dashboard, a lot of these analytics take time to collect and to play out, right? If you're looking at 30-day retention, that's at least 30 days, and if you want to see the next data point, that's another 30 days after that, right? For that cohort that you're focused on. So obviously you can track that for everybody, but just given the sheer lack of volume of data, it's also not really
you will be moving
necessarily
too slow,
enough
right?
for you to work with. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you won't have the volume of the data. You could also be moving too slow.
Yeah, it's like driving a car through a track, right? And you get a photo every hour. You get the first photo and you say, okay, we can go forward a bit, right? And you go
Great
forward
analogy.
a bit, and you need to wait for another 60 minutes to get the next photo to see where the curve is, right? And where you are and where the curve is, and then you move again. You could spend a whole year trying to get adoption in line if you get a reading every 30 days. So product market fit scoring is the mother of being able to do that in a real type, in a like release to release basis. So now the speed is more associated about how fast you can release, because you can measure almost instantaneously. It'll take us a day or two to figure out whether we are better placed from a product market fit scoring on a new release. So it is key to increase the speed in which you can improve your product by being able to measure faster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not to say that, I think you could go through actually in a moment here what we mean by the product market fit. I think that would be useful for people, but I think it's also worth pointing out that for us, this is just a simple and effective way to get a reading often enough so that we can direct the sort of the progress of the pilot in such a way that we know that we're moving forward to create more value with every release that we invest, right? Because now, having moved past the waiting list, you've done as much as you can at that stage. Now you're moving into the pilot. Now you are investing in dev and all of this, right? And operations. So we want to be able to ensure that every time that we do invest in another release, we're putting more effort in, that we're being as effective as we can with that investment, right? And being able to get an effective reading like this product market fit score is not the only one, but it is a simple and effective one that you can use beyond analytics, which typically take a lot more scale before you can really get insight from those. Maybe you can tell people a little bit about why this measure works, JP.
So, and I can use a lot of examples of things that we've done. Typically, people will use things like 1 to 5 scoring, or will ask people if they would recommend their product. What's that one called? The
NPS?
The NPS scoring, right? And if you think about it, all of those scores, typically very subjective, are directly related to the experience the user just had. So if you had a good experience, you will be more likely to recommend it to a friend. If you had a bad experience, you'll be less likely, right? But that doesn't give you an idea of the level of adoption a user will have. Going back to the concept of adoption, what is adoption? It's when a user communicates your product as the solution that they are using today. They consider it to be the most performant solution that they have to get the job done, whatever the job it is, right? And a way to basically query the user on that is to tell the user, imagine if I disappear. Imagine if I don't exist anymore. Imagine if you don't have access to this product anymore. Imagine if you have to go back to where you were doing before I turned up. And you give them 3 options. How would you feel? The person could say, I wouldn't mind. That means that you are at par or even worse than whatever they were doing before. They could say, I'm disappointed. It means, hey, it's not the end of the world. I can go back. But I prefer this method. Or I am very disappointed. I will be very disappointed if you disappear. That means that the single thought of going back to what they were doing before is painful. And that's when you got a user. And compare the difference now that you know.
It ties
Totally. Compare the difference between going and saying, 1 to 5 scoring, and someone saying, if I have to stop using this program, I have to go back to what I was doing before, that's a pain. What you ask to a user is key to what you get back from them. So these questionnaires that you create to get feedback from your users, you need to be extremely careful how you tailor them to get the right information to make decisions to drive your product towards product market fit.
Yeah, I think a key point there, in terms of what you're saying is, the decisions you can make, you can only be as good as the data that you're collecting. And if you're collecting data that's misleading or doesn't really give you a true picture of what's going on, then you could risk kind of going in the wrong direction. I think that's what we're trying to avoid. I think the other point I'll say here is that obviously this type of question is a very simple and effective starting point. It's not that it's the only thing we track, by the way. I mean, we do identify a portfolio of KPIs, including product market fit, such as the North Star KPI, and also key conversion rates in the product funnel. The onboarding, the activation, and some of the engagement retention. We do that as well, and you can instrument that either through questionnaires or through analytics, actually. But the key thing is also why you're collecting that. Like, why are we even doing this, right? Yes, it helps us to iterate and move in the right direction and make an effective use of the capital that we have available and resource, etc. But it's also data that we can use to tell a story about the progress that we've made. So when we are iterating our product and we're trying to drive in this direction of strong user adoption, the whole point is to record the data so that we can tell that story as well. And I think that's a key thing to put in mind, because if you're talking about your business sponsors or anyone else, any other stakeholders in the business, collecting the right data is going to put you in a position where you can prove to them what has been achieved in terms of traction. I want to say something as well about some of the other work streams that are important. We call this the product market fit machine, and obviously the data that you collect is an essential part of that. But obviously there's no data to collect if there's no one using the product. So obviously we need to be driving traffic to the top of this product funnel as well. Whether that's cold outreach or warm outreach or paid ads or organic content, there's basically options. That's there is work that needs to be done during a product to be driving traffic through, so that you can see the results of people coming into your product, and you can measure the product market fit score and the other things that we talked about.
And
the other thing is that
part of like the waiting list, right? Is the whole commercial aspect of we are going business first, and we are going to have a whole team during the MVP building that waiting list and nurturing that waiting list and creating more users that we're going to funnel in. It's not a build it and they will come. We're going to build it and we're going to have to bring them, right? You're going to have to send, you're going to have to get your marketing out there to get users in. It can't be that you finish your MVP and you're like, everybody's looking at each other. It's like, how are we going to get users in here, right? We need to be super prepared.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you say you don't release an MVP. You run a pilot. It has not only the build aspect, but it has the marketing aspect in it and the operational aspect, right?
Yeah, actually, operational aspect, that's a good point. Let me just jump in on that one, because the key thing here, coming back to what some of the essential guidelines to running a pilot is, again, coming back to why we're doing this, is we're doing this to tell a story right, about the progress that we have made moving towards a point of product market fit. And obviously to do that, you want to be spending in an effective way as possible, and you want to avoid falling into the trap of over-investing, in terms of what you build at this stage. What you only need to build things to the extent that they help you to prove or disprove the hypotheses that you actually have about your product, as it relates to the needs of your users and how you're trying to solve them, right? So what that means is that there's actually a lot of manual stuff that goes on behind the scenes. They call it sometimes a Wizard of Oz or a concierge style product, usually built with low-code and no-code tools, and also using a lot of automations with tools like Zapier in the background. So actually trying to avoid building code and using off-the-shelf elements in order to create a product where we can basically collect the information we need to help us prove to ourselves that we're on the right track with the product, right? And that's an essential part of moving towards a point of product market fit. Finally, I think that the other point I'll say here is that obviously there's no point doing all this diagnosis and collecting all this data about the product market fit score or the other elements of your product funnel unless you're actually going to do anything about it. I mean, JP started a bit earlier with the analogy of the race car going around the track. I mean, if you've got all these instruments in your panel, but you don't actually have a steering wheel or a brake to do anything about it, it's, what's the point? You're going to just steer yourself off the track anyway. So the analytics, yes, they're the things that help you to see out the window, but the product design work that's happening is what's steering the vehicle. So you want to have a work stream, and you want to have team obviously focus on translating your understanding of what is working and what is not working into impactful changes that you can be making to improve one or more of those KPIs that you've been tracking. And so when we run a pilot, actually, we're doing these things in parallel for at least 12 weeks and trying to make at least 5 substantial product releases during that time, which are the result of us understanding what's working or not, identifying those problems worth solving, and then releasing those impactful changes that we believe are going to drive one or more of our KPIs to improve the main one that we're measuring at this stage, which is our product market fit score.
Yeah, I'm just want to say one thing before we finish this point. For an organization,
go for it.
It is very important what Darren just said. Okay? Think about from an organization point of view, right? To be able to steer the car through the track, you need to have resources after your release. Okay? I'm going to say it again. You need to have resources after you release. 90% of the people that I speak to regarding their MVPs, they just front load all the resource to build the nicest possible app or web app that looks great and has the great UI, and we tested the UX 8 times, but by the time they release, the budget is gone. There's no more. And they have a car in a track that has at least 4 turns, because if not, it wouldn't be a track, and they got nowhere to turn the corners. And they are left with just giving it to more users and giving it to more users and giving it to more users to try to get people to stay. And they have a leaky bucket that it doesn't matter how much water you pour on top, you're going to end up with an empty bucket. So from an organizational point of view, you need to understand that you need to use only 10 to 20% of your resources for your first release. And it's going to be painful. And you're going to think that it's not good enough. And you're going to think this is not, it's not worth it. Nobody's going to adopt that. It doesn't matter. You need to reserve 80% of your budget to be able to take the corners that are coming in this pilot. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that I see is front loading all of the budget to try to look as nice as possible before we release.
Yep, good point.
I think that's a great point, JP, because what we're saying here basically is, use your brain, be laser focused on what matters. Really think about what matters when it comes to building a business, and get rid of the noise. Get rid of your appetite for building shiny things with a lot of buttons, and really think strategically. What is the ultimate goal, and just focus on the 2-3 data driven activities that make sense. And I think that that's exactly what you said, JP. It's really hard for a builder who, wants to show that, you can build, right? And
Mm.
so, I think what I'm trying to say here is that we are talking about methodologies, we're talking about tools, we're talking about how to collect data, but the main takeaway here is we're talking about changing your mindset, right? And starting to
Mm.
really like paying attention to what is relevant, get rid of the noise, be laser focused, have a plan, stick to it, and be as scientific as possible, right? So I really like where this conversation is going. Before moving on, let's quickly recap, right? Because we already covered a couple of really important takeaways.
Mm.
The first one was that turning new product ideas into real products is about creating an investable business opportunity. This is not about building an MVP or building a product, right? So let's make sure that we understand what we're talking about. It's an investable business opportunity. And the second thing is, as we we're just saying, achieving strong user adoption relies on validating your value proposition and focusing on data-driven iterations. And this is not about building shiny things. This is not about UX UI improvements. That will come much later on during the process, right? So stick on what is really relevant. So I think that what you guys have presented, there is it's a comprehensive process, but if we strip it back, what can teams do to get strong indications at an early stage that any new product or venture is going to be a winner?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'm sorry
Mm.
to say, I'm a hammer. For me, everything I see is a bunch of nails, and you're gonna hear like our method again, right? But I typically have like three stages for a new stage venture. The first stage is the what we call the idea stage, right? And this is when you've like listened to the market, you've maybe done some jobs to be done work, you've understand what the problem is, and you've come up with a proposition that you've pitched to 5 or 6 people, and they're liking it. You're getting, good, you know, people are saying it's desirable. You're getting an 8 or a 10 of desirability for an average for your value proposition and your features. And at that stage, I would say you've got about 10% of chances of making it. I've had countless times where I'm at idea stage and I pitch the idea and people love it. We go through, we have this thing called a test wall, right? And we just methodologically test every bit of the value proposition, and it's coming back great and it sounds great and it on Keynote is super, right? And then we go to the next stage, which is the waiting list, and we just, we can't find the business because people are not turning up, right? So I would say 10% for idea stage. Even if you do it consciously listening to the market, you still have a big challenge, which is, the second stage, which is waiting list stage. And in this stage is where you build the waiting list. And as I said before, it's a transformational stage. I personally, I don't think I've ever been involved in creating a business that has not been transformed through this process. I have yet to
Mm.
had the luck of saying this is the value proposition, and that's the same value proposition that we end up with at the end of the waiting list. There is always transformation, and that the proof that that you've made it is that if you're talking about consumers, you have 1,000 or 3,000 or 10,000 users onto your waiting list. That the way I describe it from a psychological point of view for the business and for the for the people involved in the project, it's like the sails get filled up with air, right? It's like there's wind in the sails, and you can start seeing that the momentum starts to happen. You get 3,000 people onto a waiting list, and you can see the
Mm.
momentum of the business, like the business rising a little bit over the water and the sails going, and it's like, okay, now we're moving. And that's when it gets easier to get people excited about it, whether you're looking for, um, a corporate sponsor, or we're looking for extra budget or whatever. It's like that wind that comes from behind. And at that stage, I would say you've got like 25% chance of like getting to the other end of the river, because you've got all the execution that comes. You have to deliver on this
True.
promise that you've
True.
created. You tell people that you're going to do this like wonderful value prop. Sounds great. Everything on paper is just like a 10 out of 10. This is great. Now you need to deliver on it, right? Now you need to create a product that is aligned with the expectations of your customers and delivers on that promise. So it's not easy, and it is a very rocky road to get to product market fit, which is the third stage, which is that indication of product market fit. And as we were discussing before, it is extremely difficult to get to a point where you are measuring, you're listening, you're delivering on the changes that need to happen, and then you're starting to see the gauge moving towards that product market fit score. It takes a lot of moving parts. There's 3 or 4 fronts that need to be working together, and it's a very big pitfall. So once you get towards an indication of product market fit, I would say you've got about 50-50 chance of getting to the other end of the river. Still 50-50 chance when you've got strong indications of product market fit. You've got all your model to sort out. You need to be able to scale and so forth. It's a different beast moving forward. But at that time is where I feel like the business is now, it has a DNA. It's got a thing on its own, and it's got enough momentum to start bringing more resource in and like sucking in resource to create speed and to advance in the market.
Yeah, I think that's a really good breakdown. I think it's kind of sobering how low those percentages are. But as you say, there's still so much to prove, right? I mean, if I just reprise quickly what you've been through, you've basically identified a real problem. Okay, that's good. Now we've identified a compelling value proposition. Okay, that's good. And we've started to deliver that for a small number of people, but we're still nowhere near really a real business per se, in the sense that we still have to prove that the model and the channel elements of how this is working are going to work as we thought, or even if we don't know how they're going to work, that we still have to work out how it's going to play out, and whether we're going to be in a position even where we have a working business. Can we afford to acquire our users? Do they pay us enough to acquire them based on the channels and the sales motion that we're using? These are still, to a large extent, those are still unknowns at that last stage 3 that you've described. So, people may think, wow, 50-50 is still low, but to be honest, as you say, like, there's still a massive amount of discovery that needs to happen, or a massive amount of validation, at least, that needs to happen before you really have a working business. I think, in the past, it's been a lot looser. There are a lot of stories of unicorns who've yet to turn a profit, right? And but I think the tide is really turning in favor of profitable businesses, and especially if we're talking about corporate innovation, it's all about ROI, right? Especially when you've gone past the explore stage and you're expecting to be able to exploit an opportunity. You definitely want to follow this process to make sure that you are increasing your chances as much as possible that you're investing in the right ideas and that you're investing in the things that you think will be a winner. But even at this stage, we should be mindful that there is more validation to do. But there is a way to do that validation. There is a path to do it. We use a model called the 4 fits, and that helps us to make sure that not only do we have the market and the product right, we talked about product market fit, but we've got the right channel and the right model to support that idea and turning it into a real business, one that's going to make an impact on the bottom line. And when we're talking about corporate innovation, we're talking about which ideas to back. That is really uppermost in our mind in terms of helping teams to identify which are the right opportunities to invest in and prioritize.
Yeah, and all done in a very nimble way, right? In the way a startup would have done it, right? We're not talking about, creating a new department in-house and chucking 500 developers and creating this huge bill that the business is looking at on a monthly basis. We're talking about doing this in a nimble way. And, we're talking about getting to a point where you have indications of product market fit when you had like 3 or 4 people involved in the project at maximum. The first stages is just one person, you don't need more than 1 or 2 people to like get a waiting list going, right?
To do all that.
So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, for us is business first. You create your traction before you even start talking about creating the big departments that pool all this resource and cost the business a fortune. It needs to be done in a similar way that a small startup would do. Validate and create the business first. And after you've done that and you've got a strong indication of product market fit, you can sit down at the table and say, I've got 1,000 customers. They're very happy with what we're doing. We want to make those 1,000 into 10,000. And this is what we need. But you're already moving. You're already creating value and you already have momentum and you're asking for more budget to increase your speed on the momentum that you already have. You're already going somewhere. You just want to get there faster.
Yeah. If I had to summarize that, I would say basically that this is basically a way that corporates can build new businesses, new products like a nimble startup, right? That's what we're saying.
Which is, I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but that's exactly one of the main takeaways of what we heard before. Like get rid of the noise. Don't overspend, don't overinvest, be nimble, and just focus on what is relevant. Right? That's the main lesson learned, I think, here today. And I'm happy about this conversation, guys, because I think that we were able to navigate a bunch of very intricate topics, but in a tangible way, which was my priority for today's webinar, right? I want to make sure that we're not just talking about the philosophy, how to build a business, but we're actually showing, in a very concrete way, these are the things that you need to do. These are the things that you need to be focused on, and everything else, honestly, is noise, right? So I feel that we kind of accomplish our mission today. So I'm going to thank you guys for joining and thank everybody also for connecting today. We hope that these insights help you navigate the complexities of building new products. Stay tuned for more webinars where we will continue to tackle the challenges you face and provide actionable strategies to drive your success. Thank you very much. Until next time.
Thank you.
See you.